Hey YouTube, what's going on? This is The Art of Prepping. Last night, right before I fell asleep, I had this idea, to talk about like life lessons or, lessons that we were never taught in school. It could just be just general knowledge, in fact, that you would be, better off if you just knew it before you entered your adult life. And I'm not talking about just like information from grade school or high school, but also from college. You'd be surprised about the things that you just don't get told or conversations you just never have in college. You would just think that everything was covered in college, but not really so. Not so at all. I spent quite a few years in college, and I can tell you, just like a lot of my friends, that sometimes you just don't get all your answers that you need to get through life completely efficiently. You just have to learn sometimes the hard way. And sometimes just the fact is that the questions never get brought up too. So you can't always point fingers at the professors or the schools and say, oh, it's your fault. But at the same time, you would think that certain subject matters would certainly be covered. And so in this video, I'm just going to highlight a few of those that surprisingly, and I think that you'll agree with me here, of course, there's always a possibility that your school did cover this, but mine didn't, and everybody that I've asked had no recollection of this type of teachings and stuff or schooling. So I'm just going to go through a few, and maybe this will help other people that are young. Maybe they're still in high school or college. Maybe this could help them in some way. That would be awesome. So here we go. The first thing I like to point out is that there's this concept of that there's good debt and there's bad debt. Now, for an individual, personal debt is bad. It's just not good on any angle. Now, you may say, well, I can write off certain debts for taxes, but ultimately a debt is a debt. And you do not want to be held liable for an outstanding obligation, because you never know what could happen in life that could put even more stress on you and make it so that you cannot fulfill the obligation. So you just want to minimize any potential for debt in your life. Now, the idea of having good debts is typically surrounded with the idea that a college education is a good debt, or a mortgage for your home is a good debt, or, well, you have to have a car, right, to get to work, so a vehicle is a good debt. And lastly, people talk about, different expenses if you have to go to the hospital. Now, that one right there is probably the only one that you may not have a lot of control over. But you do have some control depending on what type of health insurance you pick. And I do recommend that you get health insurance. It's one of the ways that people get in the most financial problems, because it can creep up on you really fast. But in terms of the other ones, why would you want to, for example, stack a debt as a young person, in a lot of cases before you even have your first career, to have tens of thousands of dollars, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt from just your tuition or school, just your school education? It doesn't make sense. Why would you want to put the burden on you? And it's going to linger for potentially decades. I know people that have had their student loans for more than 2 decades, and it looks like they're on track, if they're lucky, to get it paid off maybe after about 30 or so years. Why would you want to do that to yourself? What I did was pay as I went. And it required at one point for me to take off a few months of schooling to save more money so that I can continue to be debt-free. And that's what I think that a lot of people should probably be looking at more so, not just because I did it, because it just makes more sense. Why would you once again want to go to school and carry this very large burden when it's not necessary? So Maybe you can find a degree program somewhere else that's cheaper or more affordable. But in the end, pay as you go as much as possible. Now, the part about having a place to live and you have to have a mortgage, that's not so true either. You could easily, for the first 5 to 10 years of getting out of college, or if you have your first real career job, you could definitely go to an apartment and get yourself a very small studio apartment, or maybe a 1-bedroom apartment, something that you can really easily afford and that allows you to save a lot of money. And you save that money, and when the time comes, you can just pay in cash for your starter home. Now, this starter home is not going to be, a mansion of luxury, but it can be paid off. And that's why they call it a starter home, because it's just your first home and you move on in a matter of years when you save up even more money. But you can fix up the starter home and make it worth more as you save for your next home. Now, in terms of your car, it is completely ridiculous to buy a brand new car or a car that's newer than maybe like 3 to 5 years, just because there's so much depreciation. People say, oh, it's an investment. Vehicles are not an investment. They depreciate. Homes, well, certain types of homes, but like a brick home or a stone-built home, they appreciate in value. They go up. So there's a big difference there. And they go up typically, not in all markets, and sometimes markets go up and down. So there's different situations where that may or may not be true. But typically speaking, homes go up and vehicles go down. So buy something that's definitely used, that's typically 5 years or older. You can get a lot of very nice vehicles that are kept up with low miles. In fact, even in my rural area, there's so many nice cars that are flooded the area because people just are so used to just getting a new vehicle every few years. And so they just get rid of their old vehicle, even though their older vehicle works just fine. So this is just a plan to look at. We want to minimize our overhead, live below our means, so we can have a better life in the future. And we don't have to be a slave to debt. Another bit of advice financially would be to save up 3 to 6 months of living expenses for an emergency. So you have an emergency fund, and I would diversify where you store all of those monies. Some of it could be at a bank in a savings account. Some of it could be at home, and so forth. With this preparation, this also comes the introduction of what this channel is about, and that is to be prepared for other types of emergencies more directly. So having an emergency fund is very important, but also have physical assets, skills, and awareness to handle emergencies that happen in life. It's going to be very important. So you want to start looking into that. One way you can do that is to start watching various videos on this channel, more so than you have been, or to dig deeper in the archives. You can also check out my new paperback book, Project Readiness, and I also have it in ebook form on Amazon. There's a link in the description box. The next piece of advice I would like to give is you need to start as early as possible to start saving for your retirement. When you get that first job after you get out of high school, or if you go to college or trade school after you get out of that, then start saving right then and there. Learn about your investment opportunities and which ones make the most sense to you. You got to pick investment opportunities that will allow you to sleep at night. Don't buy into things that you don't understand, that you don't know how it works, and that worries you. Some people have different risk acceptance than others. Some people can't stand stocks, but they can deal with bonds. But they may not understand that there's still a lot of risk involved with bonds as well. So understand and educate yourself on how to save for the future. It's very important. When you're young, you don't think that you'll ever be to the point that you can't work anymore. But there's a lot of people that get to a certain age and they have difficulty continuing their job. And that's why a lot of people retire. And if you can't retire, some people go on disability. But you don't want to be dependent on whatever the government gives you with either disability or Social Security to get you through to pay the bills. You don't want to be held captive by the government. So plan now. And if you start in your early 20s saving for retirement, and you put back anywhere from 10 to 15% of your paycheck, by 30 to 40 years later, you're going to be in a pretty good position to retire. That's going to be a really good situation to be in. Next is health and wellness. We all know we need to eat good food, but we're not taught that certain foods are much better than others. We're told to have this so-called balanced diet, that a lot of processed foods are okay, just in moderation. There's a lot of disinformation about this. And if you look at the FDA and their food pyramids that change from year to year, it's just ridiculous. There's a lot of influence from the food lobbies, and they're always trying to promote their food group higher in the rankings of what you should consume, according to the official USDA, FDA, whatever nonsense. And so if you do your own research, you'll find that fruits and vegetables are the way to go. If you want to eat meat, that's fine. Eat it in moderation, but I still say eat less than more. And just be mindful of where your food comes from. Do they use, the bovine growth hormone? Is the food genetically modified? Do they use fertilizers or pesticides, herbicides? And, how does that affect you? There's a lot of things that we consume that we just don't know much about because we don't look into it. So by far, the number one influence of your health is what you put in your body, because it becomes part of you, and that's the food that we eat. Now, down the road, you have other influences such as sleep, how we deal with stress, exercise, things like that. Those are things down the road, but by far, the number one influence of health is food. So really focus on nutrition and looking at ways for your body to absorb the nutrients it needs so that it can perform at peak condition. One thing that school sometimes teaches, but not very often, is to just do your own thing. School a lot of times is about conforming to the groupthink. But the more you can think out of the box and the more you can be you, the better. Now, that's a threat to the system, so I think that's one of the reasons it's not promoted that much. But it's important to know if you're a person that, for example, likes to be alone, it's okay to be a single person. And if you like to be around other people, then it's okay to be around other people. There's some people I've noticed and actually even known in the past that felt pressured to be in relationships because of a status symbol, that they should be in a relationship because they're a mature person, and mature people have families. And I'm not knocking families, obviously, here, but it's one of those things that if you want to be alone, if you want to be single, there's nothing abnormal about that. When it comes to a time point in your life that you're ready to be with someone, then so be it. But there's a lot of times people don't get to know who they are, and they get into relationships and they wonder why it doesn't work, and they wonder why the divorce rate is so high, not just in America, but globally. And it may have something to do with that we don't understand and know ourselves fully. So how can we know how to interact with other people? How can we even know what we need and want if we don't even know ourselves? So it's really important, in my opinion here, to take some time, especially after school, to get to know yourself. Maybe even travel a little bit or do some things that you really want to do, instead of just jumping right into a very serious relationship and start having kids, because we all have an itch to do things. And if we don't scratch that itch, it's going to manifest in different ways at different times in our life, typically later in life. And it could be a big problem. So if you're a person, for example, that have never dated another person, but you're considering to marry the person that is your first date, that could be a problem. I'm not saying it's wrong, but I've known people that their first person that they've dated in high school, they married, and they always wondered what it would be like to have tried to get to know other people, just date casually a few other people. And a lot of times that itch continues to become a problem. And so don't rush into relationships. Don't try to rush knowing who you are, because it takes time for these things to reveal itself. There's a reason why a lot of people now wait until their late 20s, even early 30s to get married, because they're realizing that they need time to explore themselves. And a lot of this is by accident, because a lot of people are going to universities and stuff that require a good amount of years of their life. And once they have that college degree or college degrees, they want to use it. So they go right into a career. And that career a lot of times delays marriage or, more serious relationships, because they just don't have time to have a relationship. So we're seeing a lot of people push back, marriage, and also just having a relationship that is going to be so different than what they've ever had. And in a way, I kind of think it's not a bad thing for people to take time to know themselves. So that's what I have for today. What do you think about this stuff? Thanks for watching.